Kelsey Johnson. A majority of you know who I am. I'm a sophomore English teacher at West Fargo High, and I am a student congress and speech coach at West Fargo Cheyenne, and I'm your current NDCTE president. And yeah, so I'm excited to kick off this new venture that we have with PBS and collaborating with them to make all of this possible and a credit opportunity and to keep people connected throughout the year instead of just our annual conference that we have in the summer. Well, welcome to the session. I'm so glad that you all are here and logged in and everything. So a little background on how I came up with this session. So I'm obviously an English teacher, but I'm not a typical reader. I actually am oddly not that much of a reader, and I have a degree in theater and English. But what I do read is atypical books for an English teacher. So looking at the slide, so what I define as an atypical reader is reading beyond what a typical English teacher. Can you guys see this white screen that I have on my screen?
The what screen?
Cool, never mind. So reading beyond what a typical English teacher typically reads for fun or professionally. So typical reading might include novels, poems, short stories, other literature that you're actually teaching in your classroom. Or it could include pop lit, those new bestsellers on the fiction list, the fiction and YAL titles your librarian is raving about, or the titles that you see your students carrying around, or, the titles that are being made into movies. And it probably includes PD titles like Kelly Gallagher, the guy that came and visited us this summer, Cornelius Minor, who's coming to visit us next summer, Penny Kittle, Donalyn Miller, Jennifer Bueller, Kate Roberts, Sarah Ahmed, and countless others. So that's what I think of as a typical reader when I think of an English teacher. But Erica and I have talked a lot in the past, and that's kind of where this session came about. Is I read outside of that, and when I go to Barnes and Noble or I'm on Amazon, I find titles in the business section or the self-improvement section or the psychology section, and I actually really enjoy those books. And so Erica kind of jumped on that bandwagon of atypical books with me. Erica, do you want to kind of share your experience with getting into that genre?
Yes, it was after a conversation with Kelsey, and she was like, "Oh, you got to read Daring Greatly by Brené Brown." And then somehow we were talking about other things, and I found myself in the business section of Barnes and Noble, and I found this book, Joy Incorporated: How We Built a Workplace People Love. And I read it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's about a software company, but like they produce joy. And I just kind of got hooked on to reading like different books, and I kept finding that they were helping me become a better teacher and maybe just a better person than some of the other professional development books, but in kind of a different way. Like, yeah. So that was how I got it. And then Kelsey one time texted me a picture of a book from Barnes and Noble called The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker. She's like, "Have you read this? This looks like your book." And I listened to it and I thought, oh man, this is a really beautiful thing, because that's what we do as teachers, is we gather people. And so this lady talks about how she facilitates, it's the art of gathering. And I was like, oh man, yeah, because I used to not be a nonfiction reader or in the business section, but Kelsey kind of pointed me in that direction, and I jumped on the bandwagon.
Yeah, one thing that I notice that in my classrooms, I have a lot of kids that are very interested in business. They want to be the next big YouTube success story, or they want to figure out how to create their own job on Amazon, like being an Amazon bestseller or something like that. I don't know how technology works in that regard. but they don't want to be reading fiction books, but they're willing to read. They just need somebody to introduce them to titles that aren't necessarily what the librarian is always pushing. So that's what kind of also brought us to today's topic of atypical reading. So before I delve into my titles and what I want to chat about, can you guys think of any atypical books that you read that you could share with the group? Maybe you want to put them in the chat bar so that you don't have to chat on top of each other. These titles are awesome. I'm going to copy and paste these down into my PowerPoint at the end. So as you guys like think of titles, feel free to add them to the list. Nice long list, you guys. Awesome. We'll add those to the list. Feel free to keep typing as I'm talking or as you guys are talking. I'm really excited about some of the titles you guys put, because some of them are on my list as well, and some of them are on my list of books that I want to read. So let's go to my next slide. So these are my titles. So somebody else, I think it was Darcy, that posted Brene Brown. So I have, this is Daring Greatly. I don't understand how this works. This is kind of one of the books that started it off for me. And then I have, her next book was I Thought It Was Just Me, but it isn't. And I read that one this summer. This is a good one if you're a mom or a lady. The next one she wrote was Rising Strong. I think I'm doing these in the right order. I have not read this one yet. I think, is this the one you just gave me? Nope, it's not. And then Braving the Wilderness, which Erica gifted to me at summer conference. And then the one that I love and that I'm pushing at my school is Dare to Lead. I would write a note down that she also has the Daring Classroom materials now. I haven't looked at them. We have a 21st century leadership class at West Fargo High, and I saw one of my kids with this book on the desk, and I said, "Why do you have that?" And he said, "We're reading it in 21st century leadership." And I was super excited, and I emailed the teacher and I said, "Let's chat." That makes me super pumped. And then this is the lady that kind of started me down the path of atypical reading. Her name is Gretchen Rubin. Do any of you know Gretchen Rubin at all? This book, The Happiness Project. And then she came out with Happier at Home, which I have not read. And then there's Better Than Before, and this is on habit change. And then The Four Tendencies, which, if I can ask whatever her name is, Darcy, can you go on to gretchenrubin.com/quiz, and there's a 4 tendencies quiz that you can all take. It's a personality type quiz. It's very interesting. And then other books that I have really enjoyed are Start With Why. And somebody posted that they really liked a book by Chip and Dan. Wait, I'm going ahead of myself. Another habit book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Gretchen Rubin is really a big fan of him as well. And then somebody said they liked a Chip and Dan Heath book, Made to Stick. I highly recommend The Power of Moments. And then my other one, Daniel Coyle has written a lot of books. Erica, did you mention When? Is that a Daniel Coyle book?
It's a Daniel Pink book.
Ooh, okay. Daniel Coyle has written other stuff. The Culture Code, he's written The Talent Code and something else. So a few of these I'm going to kind of chat about with you guys and tell you like, okay, yeah, they're great books, but how does this apply to my classroom? Any questions like that you guys have about any of these titles that you want me to get into a little bit deeper? Or has anybody read any of them and they want to chat about them for a minute? I don't understand this screen. Anybody?
I really like Dare to Lead. I ended up taking most of my classroom expectations from Dare to Lead inadvertently, but I didn't check out the Daring Classrooms really, so I don't know how much that like matches. But
yeah, I haven't checked that out either. Anybody else a fan of those books?
I love them, and I found I had one particularly, I wouldn't say the class itself was tough, but that I had a lot of kids who were really vulnerable and like really needed to just be in a supportive place in one of my theater classes one spring. And I made little quotes from Daring Greatly, and had them laminated for every kid. And we kind of use that as our general motto about putting yourself out there, and that just this, her focus on vulnerability is lovely. So I agree with both of you. I can't stress the Brene Brown angle.
Has any of you guys or ladies read any Brene Brown?
I haven't read any Brene Brown, but I hear her name so much lately. She was actually just brought up at one of my, I believe it was a student engagement conference that I was at on Wednesday. So I hear awesome things about her though.
Nice. She does have a Netflix, I don't know special, I guess.
Oh.
That is on. So if you have a Netflix account, I think it's like an hour long, and it really just distills this book down and this book down into like an hour long thing. And Brene is incredibly engaging, and she has such a fun voice, and she's very real. So if you haven't read her or seen her, she's just really down to earth. Darcy, when you were talking about your theater class, the quote that you gave them, is it the Theodore Roosevelt one?
No, it's not about the Man in the Arena. I actually did buy the Man in the Arena poster, and I had it hanging in the front of my classroom though. And it's this, basically it boils down to, how dare we judge the people who are trying to do something, even if they're struggling and failing to do it, if we're not in the arena with them.
The quote that she's talking about is, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." And as a North Dakota teacher, and born and raised in North Dakota, it's a Theodore Roosevelt quote. So how fitting that we are, in Roosevelt's kind of land a little bit. The next thing I want to do, any other discussion on any of those books before I go to the next slide?
I just wanted to add with Dare to Lead, what I found most helpful as an English teacher is that she gave really clear language with how to have difficult conversations. And so I actually took some of that language and put it on the back of like this is what you need to know about my class, like the syllabus-y type thing. Because I said, my job is to give you language. And I've just noticed that so many of my conflicts in the classroom deal when kids are confused and they don't know what to do with their confusion. And I thought Brene Brown did a really good job of giving like very specific language and it was very simple. And the one that's been the most powerful is the story I make up, or the story I tell myself. And I've been using that to like have the story be the core of my classroom, but then also to be like, okay, this happened. The story I made up is this. Can you clarify the story? And then it's been making me not jump to conclusions, but it's also helping the kids like actually articulate what happened. And then it's an English classroom, and so we're talking about story, and like everything's revolving around story. So that's what I really liked about Dare to Lead, is helps with language. And as English teachers, our job is to help give kids ways with language. So
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next slide. So, atypical reading and the English classroom. So, how do these titles that I've read help me guide what I do in my classroom, the way that I speak to students, the way that I want students to speak to each other, and how I speak to my colleagues and even my superiors. So some of the things that I pulled from the general like theme of books that I read on my atypical list, there's a lot of information about human nature and psychology. And maybe because I have a theater background, and maybe because I'm a speech coach, I find that very intriguing of like what makes people tick and why do they tick. I think a lot of these books really help with building empathy for our kids. And have any of you done any trauma sensitive training in your schools? No. Sad. So probably 2 years ago, West Fargo High started doing trauma sensitive training, and we started learning about like the things that kids carry, so to speak, to steal from Tim O'Brien. And ACEs, does anybody know what an ACE is? Can somebody, adverse childhood, what does it mean? Experience. So like coming from a family of divorce, or coming from a home with one parent, or not having enough food to eat, or it could be it's not the right word, but simpler things than that, less traumatic than that, but they all account towards a kid's ACE, their ACE score. And many of these books kind of talk about how you can be more informed on how you approach students without it hitting you over the head in pedagogy and education-based research. I'm staring at like a stack of books right now, and I'm trying to think of which ones kind of do that the most. Can you think of any? I'm going to keep going to Erica because her and I kind of brainstormed this topic idea together. Erica, do you have any off the top of your head?
Yeah, well, actually what popped in my mind is The Body Keeps the Score. Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk. I have a cousin and an aunt who are getting counseling degrees, and so they had to read it for their class. My sister suggested it too, and so I was like, okay, I listened to it because it was kind of dense, but the very last chapter was about theater, and how theater is so therapeutic and healing, and even if it's not like a specific thing. But then the epilogue was about schools and about how every kid like has a shaped place to have school. Okay, I've sat in my room too long. The lights went off. I gotta go. Sorry. Okay, the lights are back on. Yeah, but just like how your body, like you physically hold the trauma in your body, and so theater, like you move, but then you get to become someone else. And I just think, wow, in the English classroom, I never thought of it like as a trauma healing place. And I don't think that that's like the main thing of an English classroom, but I think that that could be something that's a beautiful side effect of that. So, but that I had never made that connection before, because I have a little bit of theater experience, but not a ton. And but yeah, it was the last chapter. It was a really long book. It was theater.
Nice.
Yeah. But
I'm also a big fan of habit building, and in our school we have what's called like packer time or ramp up to readiness, which prepares kids to be more choice ready once they graduate high school. And in those classes, we meet 30 minutes a week, and we follow them throughout high school. So the group we get as freshmen, we have when they are seniors. And some of it deals with like executive functioning skills and just being a better person and social emotional learning and things like that. And the power of habit and Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin. Those two books talk about like how people build habits and how to support people that are building habits, and why kids might make the bad choice of not doing their homework, and it doesn't explicitly talk about that, but you can apply it to the situations that you have in your classes all the time. One, I haven't done this in my class, but I thought about doing it with the 4 tendencies. It's what is the word that I want? It's a personality quiz. And maybe depending on our time tonight, I might have you guys go do it. It's only like 6 or 10 questions. And it's all about how people respond to expectations. So if there are 4 tendencies that in this framework that Gretchen Rubin has come up with. So some background on Gretchen Rubin. She went to Harvard or Yale, one of the Ivies, for law. She ended up being a page or like a researcher or whatever they're called in law for Justice O'Connor. Is that a person? And then she realized she doesn't want to be stuck in law, and she started doing this happiness project where each month she set out a goal, and then that whole month she focused on how to make herself happier while also entrenching herself in research on happiness. And because of that book, people kept emailing her and reaching out to her and asking her, like, how did you set these goals for yourself, but how did you stick with them? Like, I would have just quit after a month, like a New Year's resolution or something. And that piqued her interest about like why people behave the way they do to expectations. And that's how she got this framework after numerous research studies and like, I don't know, figuring out how to do that type of research. So there are the 4 tendencies, and you might be able to figure out what you are just by the description of them. The biggest and most common tendency is the obliger. And the obliger will, if I tell you to do something, you'll do it just because someone else asked you to do it. And you'll keep a promise to someone else because they're holding you accountable. The next tendency is called the questioner, and they're very logic based, and they just need to know like scientific background. They need to be told why. They're not going to just do it because you asked them to, whether it's an inner expectation or an outer expectation. They will do it if it makes sense logically. Another tendency is called the upholder, and that's what Gretchen Rubin is. So an upholder will meet inner expectations and outer expectations. So if they put it in their lesson or their planner, they're going to do it because it's on their list of things to do, whether the teacher told them to do it or whether mom told them to do it, or whether they said, I want to get more fit so I'm a better football player. They're going to keep those expectations. And then the last one, which some of you are like, that's all of my students. It's called the rebel. and they're not going to do it unless they want to do it. They don't care one way or the other. So you can't really push them because they'll just rebel against you and not do it, even if they know the consequences that if they don't do the assignment, they'll just get a 0, right? So that book and her framework have really informed my teaching. And I look at how kids respond to when I ask them to do something. And if they push back, I kind of mentally go through my head thinking what their framework and what their tendency might be. And Gretchen also has a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And it's a weekly podcast she does with her sister, who is a writer in Hollywood. So you might have her shows. Her name is Liz Craft. Anyway, so the 4 tendencies is really good about how you frame your expectations to your students so that all of your students kind of buy into it based on what their tendency is. Does that make sense? That was a lot. I would recommend it. You don't even need to read this book. You can go read the gist of it on Gretchen Rubin's website, which is just gretchenrubin.com. And then the books that I really like with building stronger teamwork in classroom communities. So I'm a speech and debate coach, and one of the books 2 years ago that they were reading that they recommended was called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And if you were at conference this year, you probably heard me talk about it because I recommended it. People will remember the little things that you do if they have meaning behind them more than like the big things. So you can have a mediocre activity, but if there's one thing in it that is super memorable, that you specifically plan that moment out, it'll stick with kids longer. They talk a lot about, I think a lot of us have teachers or new colleagues that come in, right? We always have new people that we have to introduce, and like, do any of you mentor? That should be a better question. Are any of you mentor teachers? Maybe. Kim, you are? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So in The Power of Moments, it's also business related. And they talk about how there's a company, I think it's John Deere. So John Deere is able to retain their employees much longer than a rival company or like a car company or something like that, because they specifically set up moments that make people feel special. And they're not anything major or huge. It's just thoughtful. So instead of on a first day of work or the first day of school for a student, going through the syllabus, like, you know, most of us started school in the last week or two. How many of us started with like an introductory icebreaker or a just read the syllabus type of day? And maybe because a lot of you are middle school teachers, you didn't necessarily do that. But they talk about how make a moment very special. And in the John Deere world, they don't even expect their employees to actually work on the first day. And it's not all onboarding either. They set up a meeting with like the CEO or somebody very, very important to go have lunch with them in a, not the cafeteria, not a typical place, but how cool would it be if your principal went and had lunch with new teachers? Like, I think that would send a much different message than maybe what we get, especially in big schools. And it's not anything, you're not getting graded or judged. It's just get to know the people that matter in the company. And they have like flowers and balloons on their desks. I know that's not anything we can necessarily do in our classrooms, but it talks about just making little moments matter and magical. And they don't need to cost money and they don't need to be difficult to do, but it makes all the difference to a bunch of people. Yeah.
That
Questions on that?
so when you said the balloon thing, so the follow-up book to Joy Incorporated is like Joyful Leader or so, I can't remember what it's called, but Rich Sheridan really encourages people just to run the experiment. And it was some really big like insurance company, and they had these balloons on people's desks, and they was like, well, what are the balloons? It says, well, they're running an experiment. So the balloon is like, they're running an experiment, and so you should ask them what they're trying to do. But it was like also like little things, trying to improve little things. And
oh, so if they had a balloon on their desk, they were doing something that you should
ask
like.
them up.
How cool would that be? Like, I'm trying to apply that to like the classroom. If you had some sort of like visual that a kid could grab when they came in the room that they were excited to share, and if a kid grabbed it, or if however many you have for the day, you could say, hey, Erica, I saw that you grabbed the item. Tell us about why, like what was your win for the week or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a cool relationship building activity. That could be cool. I have a department of teachers. There's 15 of us, so we're pretty tight. That could be cool to have in our office, but I know in small schools you don't really have that.
There's another balloon activity that Erin Jacobson, who does the new teacher mentorship program in North Dakota, she told me about. And it was everybody has a balloon, like at a staff meeting or at a staff gathering, right? And you put all the balloons into a big bag, and then you as a group have to keep that bag afloat. Pretty easy. Then you add one water balloon to that bag.
Okay.
And now everyone has to keep that bag of balloons afloat. And it becomes exponentially harder, like to the point of being almost impossible. Even for a group of 10 to 15 people, one water balloon, contrasting the 10 to 15 regular balloons, brings the whole thing down. And that's obviously the metaphor in terms of how we choose to approach our classrooms, how we choose to approach each other. One water balloon can derail and throw off an entire department, school, classroom, whatever. And we all have to decide what type of balloon are we going to be on any given day.
Nice.
Some of you might have seen my son just come in camera for a minute and then pop back out. But while you were talking and him being down here made me think he just started kindergarten this year. And one of the activities that they did in kindergarten was that the principal came into their classroom and she did a mini lesson on how to treat others. And I don't remember the specifics, but basically what she did is something to the effect of there were a piece of paper, and the piece of paper represented words that people say, and the piece of paper represented your heart. And so if somebody said negative words or negative things to you, then she would crumple up the piece of paper, and then that would be then you would say, the kids would then learn the term, "You crinkled my heart." And so that's something that you can't, completely, you can try and smooth it out, but you can still see those crinkles even if you try and smooth it out on that piece of paper. So that's another kind of activity that that could be done to show that in a visual way.
Nice.
So is there like does anyone know like a spot that has kind of like these experiential object lesson type things? Like, is there a compilation of these someplace?
I wonder if like guidance counselors would have something.
Because I love a lived out metaphor. Like,
Yeah, you do.
like I've had a tow rope to teach citations, and like the Kenneth Burke parlor metaphor. I had a professor who I was in grad school, like she like did like I was a lived out the Kenneth Burke metaphor, which is like you're at a parlor and there's a conversation going, you come late, and so people are, you know, you don't get the whole conversation, but you catch the tenor of the conversation, but then you have to leave. Or then, sorry, you catch the tenor of the conversation, you put in your oar, so you contribute, and then you leave while the conversation's still going, and that's what research is. So the whole metaphor is that's research. You have to come, you have to listen, then you say something, and then you leave, and the conversation's still going. So this professor had us act it out. So she had like people leave the room, and then there was a group of people at the front who were having a conversation, and then she called the other people in, and they like, it was interesting to see what they did, because some of them like jumped right into the conversation and looked so stupid because they didn't listen, and then other people like listened, and then we looked at the metaphor afterwards, and it was very powerful, and like it really shaped my whole grad school experience, because it was right at the beginning of everything, but it was a moment. It was definitely a moment.
It was a moment, and it had power.
It had a lot of power.
I'm thinking of the power of this conversation and the connections that we've been weaving together, and a similar, simple, powerful connection activity that was around books, but you could do it around anything. And this was shared by Amy, a professor up at UND. She said that she has kids bring in like a book bag, a bag of books that are important to them, and they can be any book from any, like whatever magazine, like whatever, and they get to start by sharing one, and they start with holding the end of a ball of yarn, and then they explain why this book connected to them and why it was important to them, and then anyone who has a connection to that takes the string from them and then adds their story, and they toss the string around the classroom to show how all of their experiences are interconnected to this one common theme. So just thinking about all the things that we shared about Brene Brown or about any of these things, we have a virtual string of yarn connecting all of us and our classroom experiences.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, one of the things that I like about this is they gave this example throughout the book of there's this crappy hotel in California, like by Disneyland or something like that, like called the Magic Castle or something. And it's like, I mean, a 2-star hotel maybe at best. However, if you go read any of their comments or whatever, what is the word for that?
Reviews.
Thank you. Any of their Google reviews or their like TripAdvisor reviews, it's like 5 stars all the time, because people will forgive the bad room because they made up for it in this little moment where you go to the pool, and again, it's not a great pool or anything. It gets the job done as a pool, and there's a white telephone, and if you pick it up, you get the popsicle hotline, and a butler-like guy will come out with like that domed kind of chef thing, whatever that's called, with whatever flavor popsicle you wanted, white gloves and all. They take the dome off, and there's your popsicle, and they deliver it right to the pool for you. And people just keep raving about this one moment. It's a freaking like 2-cent popsicle, right? Never mind like the semi-dirty hotel room or like the rundown pool that you're in. That one moment made up for all of that. And that's what people remember when they leave that hotel, when there are all of those other resorts and hotels you could stay at. So people will remember the moment more than they'll remember the whole class period or something like that. So spend time creating moments instead of stressing about a 50-minute class period.
Interesting. Oh.
Go ahead.
So the art of gathering, she talks about you should never end with logistics. And once you've like heard that, like never end with a logistic, all of a sudden you see all these gatherings end with logistics all the time. And it's just like, oh yeah, they could have just put the logistics a little bit earlier and then really left us with a closing where we felt a sense of closure. And so I think about that at the end of lessons, and I haven't quite figured it out fully, but like how to like not end with logistics. Oh yeah, and by the way, remember you have to get homework done, but like to not end with logistics. And she also reframed for me closing the door, because I first was told like close the door, lock it, like there might be a shooter. And I'm like, oh, it's a safety thing. But she said you need to close the door because you create a world, and a world has boundaries. And so you have to draw the boundaries around the world, because when you gather, you are excluding people. And it's a good thing actually to exclude people, because you are who you are here and you're creating this world, and you do not end with logistics, which so many gatherings do.
I know we've talked, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, and we've talked a lot about Brene Brown, but my last bullet on here about creating relationship building and with colleagues and creating a common language, like what Erica had said earlier, there is language in there in her book, like, okay, I need to rumble with you, and like that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and we're going to like shots fired or anything, but I'm having a disagreement with you. I need to rumble and like figure it out with you. And if you have that shared language, it just makes communication flow more easily. There was a time like Erica and I, being president and president-elect, have had conversations, and she just flat out said to me, paint done for me, like meaning what does it look like in your head when I'm done with whatever project you needed to get done? Because what I have in my head as the direction giver might mean something completely different to the person receiving the directions. And I think about that with our students, like what I envision done looks like is probably vastly different than what done looks like for a kid, because they always follow that good enough vocabulary. So if you just have that language with your kids, like, okay, I'm going to paint done for you, then they can use that language with you. You could use it with them, and you can use it with your colleagues. I think it's a great way to open communication up with your like principal or whoever is in charge of your evaluations as well, because it gives you a way to communicate without like bad vibes between you, if there are any.
Kelsey, to piggyback off that, since I am more elementary focused, but I do have the middle schoolers too, they suggest modeling so much. You have to model everything, model writing, model for littles, classroom procedures. I mean, it could be the same thing with communication. If you want to talk to a student or a colleague about something, and you do that in a way that you would like to also see the students doing that, you have to model that.
Yeah, I had the opportunity in April to go to a Dare to Lead training. And so I have like access to this very expensive workbook. I say expensive because the training was very expensive. Thank you, West Fargo High. And it has a list of Rumble starters that would be great for your littles, even for like high school kids, like the story I make up, ... I'm curious about ... That's not my experience. Instead of saying you're wrong about her, him, them, it, this. Help me understand. We're both dug in. Tell me about your passion around this. Like, why are you getting so heated about this? That what am I not seeing that you are?
Those are all good ones.
Yeah, and if you,
I teach PE as well, and they get so competitive that sometimes it's kind of the heat of the moment and they forget, you know, proper manners and school behavior and things. So if somebody misses the winning soccer goal, they're like, oh, you suck at this, you know, when I'm like, what you mean is you'll get it next time, you know. And we really, really have to practice that when things get competitive or heated or anything like that.
that reminds me, do any of you guys do restorative justice practices in your schools for your, it's not discipline, but it's like in place of discipline? Or does anybody even know the term restorative justice? Really?
I attended a training this summer talking about it, and I'm actually going to be recording a web chat with the facilitator of that training about restorative justice and how you can use it just on a classroom level, but also on a school level. So she and I should be recording that conversation in the next couple of weeks here, and then I'll make sure to share it with people. It'll just be on YouTube, but she and I are going to have a conversation about what that looks like and how to do it.
I know you're getting that in a little bit, but is it similar to Love and Logic? Like, if you are wasting 2 minutes of my time, then when are you going to make up those 2 minutes later type thing, or no?
I'm very new to restorative justice. I did a project on it for a grad school class last semester. It's kind of like that with like a logical consequence instead of like, oh, you didn't turn in your assignment, I'm going to give you an hour of detention.
Right.
Well, those don't match. Like, is the hour of detention with me to help you work on the assignment? That makes a little bit more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Restorative justice, and Darcy, jump in if you need to me is like, if a kid wrongs, or if a person wrongs another person, instead of just saying, go to the office, you're in trouble, you're going to sit in ISS for tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Instead, it gives an opportunity for the student that did the harm to communicate with the person that they harmed and work out a solution. Like, a solution, or like, I understand because I did X what you might be thinking now, or how that might have made you feel. And it's not asking forgiveness or permission, it's just opening up communication better. Do you, Darcy, want to add to that at all? Because
no, I think that sounds pretty good. To me, the biggest thing I took away from it is it's one of the primary things is giving voice to the victim, to the person who was hurt by the transgression, and with the hope that that both helps the person who was hurt and also helps the person who was in the wrong understand why this was a problem, particularly if we come from some offenses where the person might truly not understand why what they did was a problem. I think a lot of kids do understand why something is wrong, but not always. And just instead of telling them, well, that's wrong, and so like Kelsey said, you get detention now, it's taking them through a little bit of a reciprocity process of having to truly right that wrong.
Yeah, we read a novel like that in our class every other year that I just shared in the chat, called Touching Spirit Bear. And the student commits, well, he doesn't commit a crime, but he beats up a kid really bad in school, and he can either basically go to jail because this is his last chance, or he can head to circle justice and make himself better from the inside out kind of thing. And it's a really good book, and middle schoolers relate to it. Definitely. They really enjoy it.
I'm typing another title. It's called The 57 Bus, which is part narrative, part journalistic writing, based on a true story that happened in Oakland. A Black student, it is important to know that he's Black. A Black student set a transgender student, they use the pronoun they, on fire, and they didn't know, was this a hate crime because it's a transgender student? Was it a hate crime because it was a Black kid, or it was a minority against another minority type of thing? And it talks about how it goes through the criminal justice and like the courts and everything, but it is also criminal, or it's also restorative justice practices, because the parents of the student that got put on fire, like they didn't want this kid's whole life to go down the drain, and so they were open to a restorative justice practice. So it allowed the kid to make amends for what he did, and to also understand why it was wrong to do what he did, type of thing. We're getting close on, we're over time, actually. My last slide was just on if you guys had other book titles you wanted to suggest and ways that they could fit into the classroom or your professional life. Go ahead and share. I saw somebody wrote Rachel Hollis up there. Does anybody have any ideas of how Rachel Hollis fits into?
I was the one that shared Rachel Hollis. She has a lot of personal growth and reaching goals and creating those habits to keep the goals. A lot of the things that you talked about already. But it's called Girl Wash Your Face. And then she has Girl Stop Apologizing. So in the Girl Wash Your Face, she kind of talks about those. And then in the Girl Stop Apologizing, she gives you step-by-step instructions basically on how to reach really any goal that you possibly have. It could be professionally, it could be personally, it could be for your family. It really doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter how big or how small. They're really good. They're really good books. And she is a motivational speaker too. And I feel like she's really kind of a hot topic these days.
She is. She has a podcast called Rise, and she does one with her husband, Dave Hollis, called Rise Together. Gretchen Rubin just had her on her podcast about a week or two ago. And I think Gretchen was on her podcast maybe a month or two ago. So there's a lot of crossover that I see with the authors that I read.
To add to the Rise Together podcast, it is about, mostly they focus on their marriage, but it could really be applied to any relationship. It could be a coworker's relationship or a friendship or anything like that. So I feel like it's just really good. Well, good, bad, or otherwise, take it how you will. It's a lot of relationship suggestions that you could really use anywhere.
Yeah. Anything else? I don't want to like take up all of your evening. I hope you got something out of this session, even if it was just a longer to read list. And if you're reading the chat bar, you can see that Kim and Erica are all about a informal book study. I'm responding to your, Kim posted that she wants to read The Power of Moments for ways to celebrate student and teacher success in PD coaching and mentoring. I would also add to that, Kim, the culture code, because some people prefer certain celebrations. Like some people want it personal. That means more to them than like a celebration in front of a group of people. So I would recommend that one, Kim. Cool. Any other questions? Our next NDCTE chat is hosted by Erica. And what day are you on, Erica?
It's 2 weeks from now.
Nice.
What
So
day
the
is it?
23rd?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think.
Tell all your friends. Hers is going to be on atypical games in the English classroom.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Yep. Peace out.